Hi, everybody. Thanks very much for joining in. I've got a great set of attendees already and some more coming in as I speak. So welcome to today's webinar. Today we're focused on the role that self-sovereign identity and digital credentials will play in setting up students for success in their educational and professional and social lives, and how they'll help what we call lifelong learning. Today's webinar is recorded, by the way, so please note that. And while the webinar is progressing, please put your questions into the chat feature. You'll see that in Zoom. No doubt you're as familiar with Zoom as we all are at the moment, so you'll see chat in there as well. Put your questions in there, we'll cover them at the end. So this is the latest in a series of webinars that we've been holding at Evernym on the topic of digital credentials and self-sovereign identity. And back in January, we had a really good session actually on credentials in the higher education sector, and this, bringing in this topic of lifelong learning and learner mobility. And that went down really well, actually. We were talking a lot about the theory and what could happen and what theoretical user journeys would look like. And for this one now, we're actually putting some bones, so some meat on the bones of the topic and going from theory into practice. And we're going to be talking here with a company who are actively building digital credentials and self-sovereign identity into their business. I'd like to introduce Digitary to you. Could you just jump on the next slide, please, Taki? So Digitary were founded by a gentleman called Andy Dowling in Dublin in Ireland in 2005. And since its launch, Digitary's grown to become one of the leading platforms for online certifying, sharing and verifying of academic credentials. They've been very learner-centric since day one, actually, and they already enable millions of learners to hold and manage their digital credentials online in a way that's quick and secure and easy to use. And we've been working with Digitary for, crikey, probably nearly a year now, and they've really grabbed this, this idea of self-sovereign identity and extending their business into the world of digital credentials. And they're used by institutions in over 130 countries, I think now. And the organizations that use them, the higher education providers that use Digitary, they're using Digitary to help to eliminate credential-based fraud, which is an increasing problem. And we're going to hear a bit more about that shortly. So introducing the speakers that we're going to have today, we have Takis Diakoumis, who's the CTO for Digitary, and we have James Murray-Beckman, who's the COO as well. We're going to start with James, but just before we do, just go to the next slide for me for a second. Thank you. So just as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded. You can look at all the previous webinars actually on the evernym.com website. And the Q&A, if you've got any questions, I can see some coming in already, just drop them in the Q&A section. We make a note of them, and after the formal piece of the presentation, then we'll come on to that Q&A as well. So without any further ado, James, can I hand over to you? And it's all yours.
Great. Thank you, Andy. Look, we're excited about doing our first webinar with Evernym. And today, Taki and I wanted to take you through Digitary's journey to SSI. Lifelong learning is something we discuss often at Digitary, from the formulation of our products to discussions on why we exist as a company. We see lifelong learning as a continuous pursuit of knowledge and something that drives both mobility and employability. It helps learners to improve their skills as they continue to evolve throughout their life. And look, we know that today people can have multiple careers that can include many life pivots. And education helps equip learners with the best tools to be successful and helps them to tell their best story. Digitary has also always been about supporting learners, as Andy said, and very learner-centric. And we've built a strong reputation in the issuing of academic credentials, and we partner with many of the world's largest universities. We continue to evolve as a company and work towards building a consolidated view of academic credential achievement. We've created a number of sharing mechanisms through our platform to support the user and on this lifelong learning journey, and offer them the ability to assert their claims and accumulated knowledge earned throughout their lives. And we see the ability for a learner to create a targeted profile to tell their best story based on the requirements of the situation. And you can see how this is starting to fit within that SSI journey. At Digitary, we continue to evolve our products based on discussions with our partners and market needs. And we quite often will run user sessions with universities and try to understand, what are driving some of their decisions. And after starting out in the issuing of official documents, such as degrees and transcripts, the next logical evolution for us was badges and micro-credentials. Badges allow the recognition of both formal and informal learning, and it's this recognition that can be standards-based and also provide a pathway to higher credentials. And we're starting to see badges also used a lot more around in helping a learner to articulate their soft skills. And we've seen badges become the new microcurrency in learning. In Australia recently, especially with COVID-19, we've seen we've seen the government now encourage universities to help fill some of the skills gaps, especially around health. And you can see how something like a badge or a micro-credential is an obvious way to help recognize that. And, the great thing about badges is they're flexible, social, and secure. And now we're seeing that badges are being widely adopted and continue to grow in popularity. I'll hand you over now to Taki, and Taki will help to continue more on our SSI journey, and also will walk through a bit of a demo of our SSI solution.
Right. Thanks, James. Thanks, James and Andy. All right, so I'm going to start a little bit by talking about academic credentials, and in particular sharing academic credentials, which is part of our offering, part of our value proposition, if you like, at Digitary, and obviously it is a very good pathway or segue into why SSI was a great fit for us. So let's look at the problem space a little bit. So as you can perhaps imagine, at the moment, there is still quite a mixture. So even though it's 2020, we are still mixing a lot of stuff. There's still a lot of paper being shuffled around in the post, in the snail mail post, notarized documents being sent between institutions, between countries, between employers, and so forth and so on. There's also a number of electronic documents. Electronic documents, I use that term very loosely. That can be anything from a photograph of an award or a transcript from a university that people might send, all the way to some more official PDF documents that might be shared, and indeed that might be shared through platforms like our own. Now, there are millions of these documents, millions of these artifacts that are being sent around, and they're being sent around by both learners and institutions. So learners might attach them to one of their applications, whether it's a job or they want to be, an admission to university, maybe a postgrad course and lifelong learning journeys and so forth to support that sort of process. Or what you might refer to a B2B solution, where an institution is sending documents from itself to another institution to support an underlying learner's requirement to enter that second institution, and so forth and so on. So the channels differ. It could be learner, it could be institution. There's quite a mix. Now, as a part of all of this, as you can imagine, paper, electronic, photos, PDFs, millions of documents, different channels, and so forth, it starts to introduce a number of verification challenges. And by verification challenges, we're starting to talk about the authenticity of the documents, the authenticity, the certification, and the verification, which are two subtly different and equally important sort of things. And of course, beyond all that, you've also got the management and the storage of all of these artifacts that you've collected, millions of documents of images and PDFs and so forth, and they have to be attached to applications for admission or for employment or for visas. And so forth, a lot of immigration officers and other and similar sort of government institutions requesting this type of information to support a visa or moving from country to country and so forth. And of course, back to the verification piece, and this is something that also that Andy mentioned earlier on, fraud, as you can imagine, is actually quite a big problem. And I forget the specific figure, but it's at least, it's sort of upwards of 15+% of some of these documents that are sent around. And that's actually quite a large number when you consider the millions and millions of documents that are sent around. All right, so for us at Digitary, to explore and discover solutions around the sort of challenges that that world presents forces us to always challenge our own assumptions. And indeed, it helps us challenge how we've solved these sorts of problems in the past. Like, you know, we are an issuing platform. We try to enable learners to continue their onward journey in mobility and lifelong learning and so forth. But we like to review the mechanisms that we've used before. How relevant are they today? How relevant will they be tomorrow? As a part of all of those processes that we go through, and a lot of internal reflection that we do at Digitary every day, in fact, what we often find, always, in fact, is that trust is key. Trust in issuers, trust in learners to be able to securely articulate their awards, and trust indeed in our underlying technology and the platforms and the different services that we use. So trust is at the center of what we do at Digitary. And SSI for us, when we began to explore it, and indeed when we began to read about it, when we began to engage with organisations like Evernym and Andy and his wonderful team, we sort of were looking at it and we're thinking, wow, this really is that next level in a digital world. You know, it's beginning to fill the gaps that are present in our broader digital landscape. The fact that the internet lacks that identity layer, and with that vacuum, it's being filled by, you know, all these other networks and social and professional networks and all these other bodies that actually control our information, and from our point of view, learners' information on their terms and not so much on learners' terms. So it was starting to look like a really viable fit for us. It was like, wow, this is what we've been looking at, and this is, and we had explored other blockchain-based solutions. We had examined a number of different techniques. We'd spoken to a number of different organizations. We'd actually, POC did a number of internal proof of concepts to sort of figure out what's a good fit, what is the best complement for what we currently do. So self-sovereignty for us, it reflects our Digitary ethos. The whole notion of self-sovereignty, and indeed the wider sovereign network, really reflects Digitary's values and goals. We believe in empowering learners to achieve their dreams along their lifelong learning journey. It was also important that the technology was based on free and open systems, free and open standards, because that also aligns, it aligns to what we've done in the past, it aligns to the platforms that we use today, and it's critical in how we want to continue to do things tomorrow. A key is, of course, ownership and control of learners' own information. How they choose to use that information and how they choose to share that information also aligns perfectly with the reasons we exist. And a number of the specific elements of how you could use SSI and the way that you can, you know, assert some of the awards that you gained really align to some of the direction that we're heading in around profile curation and so forth, like James mentioned. So as we support learners presenting their best selves, using curation tools, using zero knowledge proofs, for example, to respond to direct questions with direct answers, we find that it works within our current offerings. So we don't necessarily expect it to supplant our current offering. We expect it to be a very full-featured complement to our current offering. And it actually begins to familiarize our learners with self-sovereign concepts that we believe will also prepare them for that new digital landscape that goes beyond some of the learning and lifelong learning, in fact, sort of things that we talk about. So let's review our goals. So what were, you know, when we first engaged Evernym, when we first headed down this SSI journey against our platform, what were we trying to achieve? What did we want to figure was our measure of success? How do we figure, how could we measure it? How could we determine that we were on the right path? How could we validate our original assumptions? So a clear articulation of our goals, what SSI or solutions like it offered our learners, and indeed our direct customers. Our direct customers are in fact institutions, higher education institutions that we work directly with as partners, and indeed how it would fit within our existing infrastructure, within our existing tech stack. That was also very, very important to us. We've got a number of different developers actually spread in a number of different countries. Our stack is built with a myriad of different technologies. So we needed to understand how the tech that SSI offers, or how the tech that SSI is built upon, how does that fit within ours? What do we need to skill up in? What other services are we going to need to acquire or look at or review and understand, and so forth and so on? And again, partnering with Evernym actually helped us do that. We feel very much that we got so far along so much sooner because of the help and the support that we got from Evernym, and that was another key and critical part of our journey. So let's have a look. So our first goal was actually very simple: to establish a connection to learners. And by connection, we're talking about an SSI connection, a way for us to essentially create that foundation that will then create that enabling trust channel, if you like, between us, that we can then start to authenticate against the platform, issue academic credentials that a learner currently has within our platform as an issuing system that it is. And also, we started also to explore supporting proof requests. And that last one was a little bit interesting for us, because supporting a proof request, whilst our platform does support a number of verification services, in the manner that SSI, the way that it works in SSI was a little bit different to the way that we've typically worked in what we might term a more traditional model. And we'll look at an example of that as well as we go through. So let's have a look at what we did. Now, I've got a little bit of a demo. Now, it is a recorded demo, and I'll be going through initially the first 3 goals. Okay, I will have a look at the first 3 goals where we establish a connection with the learner. Then we begin to leverage that connection. So we start to get an idea of what can we do with what we've now got? What can we do with this connection? What does this channel mean for us? How can we leverage, some of the power of this peer-to-peer channel that we've built? So we're going to look at authenticating a learner onto the platform. How can we use it to get the learner not use a traditional login method that we've used in the past, that we use now today. And then, of course, to issue an academic credential. And we'll have a look at an academic credential, how it looks in its, let's call it, natural form. And then we'll have a look at what it looks like in a digital wallet. I will be pausing through the demos and just sort of stopping it every now and then and having a little bit of a chat about what's happening. And what some of the pieces on the screen mean. This is also, as an aside, a bit of an introduction to our platform, because obviously contextually, the design was our approach was intended to fit within our current offering and complement some of the things that we've got. So let's have a look at the first one. So this first one is establishing a connection. Now, all right, so I'll kick it off and I'll stop it every now and then. Now, on this one, so this is the typical profile page. I won't go through the specific elements, but this is where you can typically sort of manage your account, whether it's your name or some of the different ways that you can log in and connect. Actually, what I should say is on the right-hand side, what you can actually see is that's the digital wallet. And this is actually a mobile, so we've connected it through the browser here. And you can see it's like it says, you now have a digital wallet. So this actually, it implies that this is a brand new wallet that the learner has gone and downloaded the app and installed on their phone. They don't have any connections at the moment, so we'll establish one now. So on the right-hand side, you'll see what's happening within someone's digital wallet on their phone, and on the left-hand side, you've got the platform. So I'll just press play again. All right, so there we go. Okay, so now they'll hit connect. All right, I'm just going to pause it here as well. Now, all right, so the first thing that you see here, now again, we wanted to introduce SSI to our learners without talking too much about necessarily what SSI is. We have found in our experience with the platform, and you know what, with any number of platforms, no matter the domain, that sometimes getting too deep in the technology can actually get in the way of what you're trying to achieve. So again, focusing on the goal and focusing on what we're trying to do, we try to keep a lot of the familiar terminology, the familiar, some of the more familiar paradigms, if you like, that people know, that are more common in mind. So here what we're doing is we're sort of saying, connect your digital wallet. And it could be another digital wallet if you like. We actually, over here, we've got a link to download and install the Connect Me application, which is Evernym's offering. That's our recommendation at the moment. That's also the one we've been working with. And we've got a couple of links. So this is the pretty vanilla sort of find your app here, install it, and then sort of carry on. I'll continue the video. So after they come down, so they've installed the application at this point onto their phone. and I'll click next. And what it's doing at this point is it's creating a unique invitation. And what it's done is it's created a QR code. I'll play that again. And you can see, I'll just pause that right there. You can see on the right-hand side, we're actually now scanning it. So now you're looking through the phone at what we're looking at on the screen on the left-hand side, and they're scanning the QR code. And I'll play that. And I'll pause it again. Now, on the right-hand side, the phone is saying, hi, Digitary wants to connect with you. So that is the underlying connection that we are trying to create between Digitary and the learner. And at this point, oops, sorry about that, right. Here we go again. I'll sort of click through that. All right. You'll accept the connection. And that's it. It's done. So now what we have is a connection between Digitary and the learner. And we can use that as a trusted and secure channel to do all manner of things. And the next example that we're going to see that uses this channel that we just created here is to authenticate onto the platform. All right, so this login panel is a bit of a case in point, actually, about the sort of things that we've been talking about the fact that a lot of online identity, I guess, is delivered or asserted through or controlled by other entities. And in fact, you can see this is actually our landing page and our login page. And you can see here, we've got a number of different ways that you can authenticate on the platform. We support, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, even your education provider, plus we've got a local login. Now, of course, essentially what we're doing is these services, if you like, they're identifying us on their terms and of course, collecting all manner of private information and so forth. So I guess the world that we're heading towards, or ideally the world that we want to head towards, is that you probably only have that bottom button there. That's something like, sign in with your digital wallet. Is really where we'd like to go. So let's see what we can do now with that underlying connection that we established earlier, that we created for our profile page. So assume this is a second visit onto the platform where I've come back in and I've come to the landing page, and I'm going to have a look at all my authentication methods. I'm going to go, nope, I want to sign in with my digital wallet. And at this point, I scan my QR code. So you're going to see on the right-hand side, the phone again. You can see the added connection for Digitary is in the digital wallet from the previous example. It's the login request has been received, and we're in. And that's how simple that was. We are looking at making that even cleaner. We are looking at making it even simpler. Some of the things, and you'll see that in the next example as well. Could it be easier if we just dropped a QR code, for example, on the page? We didn't have to go through that process. But again, that will happen probably iteratively. That's the sort of thing that we're looking at developing and delivering probably in stages when people are a little bit more familiar with the sort of things that we're talking about. All right, so now let's go to, I guess, the key, the ultimate goal for us, which was actually to issue an academic credential that we've got within our platform that you have earned as a learner. So here we're actually logged in as Zoe. And Zoe has a particular credential from the fictitious University of Western Hobart. It doesn't actually exist, we made it up. And I'll play this video, and again, I'll stop it. Now, one point I will make, you'll see on the right-hand side, the wallet has essentially been reset. So in this example, the reason we did this one in this example is we wanted to show you how we've combined a connection with the issuing of a credential. Now, it's essentially just gluing together the two processes that you saw earlier. So we're going to establish the connection real quick, and sort of it becomes, instead of a sort of two-stage process, it's a bit of a three-stage process. And again, it just shows you a little bit how fluid, or how you could perhaps explore and tease out some of the different ways you can establish and issue these creds that we're talking about. So let's have a quick look at this. All right, so this is essentially a document view. So I'll just quickly give you an overview of this as the video is playing. So you've landed here. You can see any number of transcripts. We also support badges like James mentioned earlier and other micro creds. You can see you can do different sorts of actions and so forth. So now we're going to go into this transcript from Western Hobart. And you can see here I can perform some additional actions. And I'll just stop it there. Just have a look at the transcript. So this is a very typical transcript. It's got some top level information, the learner's name, it may have some slightly more personal stuff like their date of birth, student number, you know, real sort of identifying sort of pieces there. We then go into the qualification itself, you know, the University of Western Hobart, it's a postgrad course in advanced computer science and so forth and so on. And the information gets more and more granular as you move down, and you're looking at sort of units that they've done and some of the specific grades that they got within the unit. So that's how granular, top level all the way down to sort of micro information. So what we want to do now is we want to download that into our digital wallet. Now, like I said before, they haven't created a connection, so this is a reset wallet. So the first step is to, again, go through the similar process that we did before, establish a connection. So we'll click next on here, you'll get the QR code like you saw before. So this is that unique invitation. And what it's doing here is we're using distributed identifiers. And you'll have a unique distributed identifier, a DID, for yourself, and indeed the institution, or Digitary in this case, will have one. And that represents, that unique ID represents that communication channel between the two of you. So after this, we are now sending an invitation to your wallet, and you can see on the right-hand side that you've now got, so I'll just pause it here. So if you have a look on the right-hand side, what we've essentially done is we've defined a data structure or a schema. And this data structure and schema is actually is the other piece that lives on the ledger in addition to ourselves. And what we've done is we've sort of summarized. We didn't go to quite the granularity that you saw in the transcript. And for the demo, what we've done is we've sort of picked up some top level information, and we've sort of figured, you know what, a GPA is probably a useful sort of measurement or metric or what have you that you might want to put in a typical academic credential. So we've sort of taken a bit of a subset of the transcript. In reality, or, you know, a future iteration, it may go all the way down to the units, but I guess, you know, we're sort of teasing out some of those things. So we'll continue that one. So you get a bit of a glance of, oh, okay, cool. This is what I'm being sent from the platform. And then I choose to accept it. And the platform knows that you accept the invitation, and then it sends you the digital credential, and then you're done, which is great. So you have now got a digital credential in your digital wallet that has been sent, that represents your award from the University of Western Hobart, and you can have a look there on the right, with the GPA and your name and when you got it and the enrollment period and so forth and so on. So you are now equipped with a verifiable digital credential you can use to support all manner of different sort of things you might want to do, onward education in your lifelong learning journey, or vie for employment, visa applications and so forth and so on. All right. So that fulfills our 3 key goals and critical parts around establishing connections and using those connections, and then issuing academic credentials based on a transcript represented by some data structure. And like I said, we're still sort of teasing out how we represent some of those different data structures and how many points of information we push off into the digital credential. And we're still learning a little bit about that. Above all else, for us in particular, these are the key elements as a credentialing issuing platform that we sort of wanted to establish. So these were critical parts. This was a very critical path for us and one of our main goals. And we were quite chuffed when we got to this stage. This was kind of cool. This was actually the complement that we have actually been looking for our platform to take us to that sort of world beyond, if you like. Being able to support another vehicle like this, another medium to help our learners achieve their goals, was really our true north with SSI. So this stage, it really began to validate a lot of our core assumptions. It began to validate our technology choices in going down this path. And it also, of course, it validated our partnership with Evernym, who supported us to sort of get as far as we have. Now, what we'd like to look at now, so this is the proofs. Now, this is where we start to use some of the academic credential that we were just issued to support the next step, another activity. what a proof allows you to do, or what, in fact, now that I have that digital academic credential, I'm able to sort of, curate my profile. I can tease it out. I can essentially start to create a perfect, if you like, representation of myself that I want to go and present for that next stage. I can share it easily and securely, and I can also share only what's being asked for, right? So, we're heading toward that sort of zero knowledge proof where I can actually answer a question without divulging all of this other sort of peripheral, if you like, information to support that sort of response. And now I'll quickly show you a quick demo of a proof request. Now, a proof request, this one was a little bit different for us because it's in our typical verification services, what we do is we invite verifiers back onto our platform. That's how some of our more traditional mechanisms work. So in this particular case, we thought, okay, cool. So what if we started to drop different components on different platforms? So here is a bit of an example. So this is a mock-up. This page is completely make-believe, as is Winston's College. But it represents a typical admission application process that you'll go through. And typically it'll be actually very, very long. A lot of them are more than sort of 7, 8, 9, 10 sort of steps. And it's quite an arduous sort of journey for someone who's applying for a new sort of tertiary or higher education position. It's even trickier if you're, an overseas student sort of moving between countries. So moving not only between sort of institutions, but moving between countries, it gets even trickier. So I'll play this one and you have a look. So what we've done is we sort of built an embedded widget, and the intent here is that we can drop this widget into an application sort of form like this, or we could drop it in a job board site or something like that, for example, and you can start to present and pass on some of the academic credits that some of these services are asking for. So let's play this one through. So what we're going to do now, they're going to go through the process of adding a new qualification. So you can see there's a couple of bits that they've done there. You can see our digital wallet is on the right-hand side there, and we've got that cred that we got earlier, the academic credential that we picked up earlier. So we're going to add a new qualification. So we've sort of, again, like I said, we've made this up a little bit, but you've got the verifiable cred now from your digital wallet. So you would select that as that's actually what I want to present. And at this point, we're generating a QR code again. And what they're actually doing at this point is they're actually going to create a connection to us. And then they use, or the institution, in this case, Winston's College, would essentially use us to, I guess, piggyback off our SSI connections to sort of push in some of the information that they're looking at. So like it's saying, you're now connected to Digitary. Winston's College would like this information from you. So it's asking for your name and your GPA and some of those bits and pieces that we saw that we got from Zoe's digital credit earlier. And that's what's being presented on the right-hand side in the phone. And then the way we've built this component, there's a callback afterwards when we actually get the cred, and then we push it back to the application site. And then the application site, again, as a mock-up, could sort of present it back to the user as something that they've done. And you can see here where the verifiable credential from your digital wallet, it's been sucked in, and it's from the University of Western Hobart. It's an advanced computer science degree has been awarded. There was additional information tacked onto that, as you saw from that proof request. And that's also been held as a part of that application. So this is just an example. This is an example of how a proof request could potentially work with different places and different institutions. And I guess this sort of thing, and the sort of thing we're exploring now, is how could we support, whether it's institutions or job boards or employers or whatever, how could we support them in being able to use SSI and sort of leverage, I guess the growing popularity, or the growing, the uptake of these types of creds in the market. All right. So what have been our key takeaways, and what have been the critical paths and takeaways? What do we learn? And for us, as always, focus on what we're trying to achieve. That was one of the critical bits, and we did go back and forth on this a little bit, because it's very easy to get sucked in by the tech, and I certainly got sucked in by the tech because it's interesting stuff. It's really, really interesting stuff, and it really is that leap. And when you think about some of the sovereign principles and so forth, it's like, wow. So what I had to do certainly a few times was, don't treat it like a hammer looking for a nail. Focus on your platform's capability. Focus on, how you could leverage some of the concepts and approaches to complement your existing offerings. Another thing that we found critical, and this was some of the albeit internal testing that we did, we're actually moving to that stage of external testing shortly. But one thing that we found useful was use familiar terminology. Use familiar elements within your pages. Don't get too exotic introducing too many new things. You probably saw on some of those pages, with the word blockchain didn't exist anywhere. There was no sort of distributed ledgers, SSI, all that sort of stuff. We deliberately avoided that stuff. We tried very hard to keep it common and simple and easy. You're finding, especially when you're asking people to download apps and connect in different ways and so forth and so on, you want to keep it nice and clean and simple so that people understand what you're doing. Hiding complexity, sort of leading back into that previous point, it's important that we beneath some of those interactions that you saw between the phone, between our platform, there are a number of different interactions that are happening. There's a number of different components and a number of different services, including going down to the distributed ledger on the sovereign network and so forth. So hide that complexity. Get it down to as few steps as you possibly can. One of the things that we're actually exploring at the moment is to actually remove a number of those steps that you saw and actually start to drop QR codes on the platform instead, and just use that as a sort of a single point where I scan and I point and I click and bang, I get my cred. There's some of the sort of the next level things. So a lot of these were teasers for us, sort of helping propel us to that sort of next iteration and that next level of what we'd like to do. So again, work towards learners' outcomes. It reinforced our position. It reinforced our direction as we tied it back to our core Digitary mission, an objective of sort of supporting learners on their journey. And again, clearly articulate and focus on enabling that job to be done, right? Learners have a job to be done. They don't want to go and spend, a heap of time on your platform or playing with their phone or whatever. They're trying to do something. They're trying to get admission into the next course. They're trying to support a visa application. They're trying to get a job. Help them do that. Nail that part of the problem, and you're likely to do really well. And SSI is a fabulous vehicle for this. So our job is to enable learners to fulfill their dreams. That's the way we see it. And we do that through helping them be mobile on their lifelong learning journey. And working with Evernym and working with SSI has really continued and reinforced that mission for us. And we're excited for this next new chapter at Digitary. We're excited for the next new technology leap that we're actually making with some of these things. Our teams are excited. Our dev teams are excited. We're playing with different infrastructure. We're playing with different components. We're reviewing and getting involved in different sort of groups and even organizations like Evernym that we haven't sort of dealt with previously. So it's a great time to be sort of fiddling with this space. And we're certainly thankful to the work that Evernym's done with us. And we're also grateful to the Sovereign Network as a bit of a goal for us to share, I guess. And the fact that this is all free and open and built on open standards and systems for us just adds to that enormous power. So thank you. Thank you very much for listening to me. And Andy, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, fantastic, Taki and James. Thank you very much. And isn't it great to see demos of real things with beautiful UIs that just smoothly work and are very kind of familiar to people? Because something we see a lot is people just kind of trying to understand how these digital credentials work. But when you see it presented like that, it's really easy. Do you want a credential? Yes, please. Scan the thing. I've got it. So that's very cool. Now, normally at this point, we ask for questions, but we're literally overwhelmed with the amount that have come in. 22 so far. Do you just want to stop the screen share there for a sec, Taki, and you can see everyone's faces all in one go there. Perfect. So we've got loads. So thank you very much for everything that's come in. So let me just kick off with the first one. So Mark Packham, hi Mark. You said, hi Digitary, how soon will your SSI offering be available and what credentials, i.e. use cases, will it cover for students and institutions? James, do you want to give Taki a rest and you take
Yeah, that's right. Look, as Takis demonstrated, we've done our internal pilot, and we're currently in discussions with a couple of institutions about running an actual in-live market pilot. Obviously, a few delays just with the COVID-19 sort of stuff, and we're looking at about Q4 at the moment. So, yeah, hoping to get it on this side of the year.
Very cool, thank you. And I've got to say, we've had more and more interest from higher education institutions than ever, and it feels like the COVID thing is has been a bit of a catalyst. Things like remote learning being more important. Have you seen that as well?
Look, honestly, we've really seen a big change in just probably around the urgency, and obviously universities have really had to adapt quickly and move to whether or not it's move their courses online, the reduction in the face-to-face components, and you never want to kind of have success in this type of market, but we've actually seen our inquiries increase as universities do that. And so we see this now as something that looks to continue long after this is all sort of settled down. It's kind of now really sort of helped institutions to evaluate. Obviously, the big focus at the moment is just getting the courses online. That's taken up a lot of the development efforts within the universities, but I think it's almost created that awakening.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, next one, and this is one that I absolutely cannot answer, so I'm going to throw it over to you guys. Can panelists comment? This is from Greg Nadeau. Can panelists comment on emergent standards to apply verifiable credentials to education, specifically IMS Global CLR, IEEE ILR, and PESC EdExchange? Now, I've never heard of any of those ones, but I'm guessing you guys have. So who? Yeah, Taki, do you want to take that?
Yeah, there's a whole lot there. Now we've got, I think they've mentioned some what I'd probably qualify as emerging standards and quite established standards. ILR is something that which is the interoperable learner record, which is a bit of a wrapper around any number of different types of learner records. PESC is an existing standard that we actually work with a lot. There's a lot there. So do you know what these standards actually help us do is they help us define a lot of the data structures that we need to understand and use. And actually the data structure that you saw there was actually based on a data structure that we've built that we then took a subset off to put on as a schema onto the ledger. So that's how we see a lot of those standards being leveraged. Now, there's no reason why you couldn't use some of those styles. Indeed, our standard, which we call our Digitary Learner Profile, which is our data structure, is actually loosely based on the PESC model, which is the North American sort of play, ELMO, which is a bit of a European play, and so forth and so on, the CLR, which is the Comprehensive Learner Record, IMS Global. There's so many players in this space, it's incredible. But our aim is to use and cherry pick from all of those. Because what we want to do as a service provider is to be able to support and transform between all of those different dialects, if you like. So we would like to deliver verifiable creds and digital creds that could be articulated in all of those forms. So that when I go and issue a proof request, if that admission application in the demo that I showed you earlier, for example, required a PESC one, perhaps that cred could have been represented as a PESC sort of style schema, and then it could have been pushed back like that. So again, we are not ruling anything out, and frankly, all of those that have been mentioned are very much in for us.
Cool, thanks. And James, you were mentioning beforehand that some of the Digitary folks sit on some of these standardization bodies, right?
Yeah, look, we believe it's really important to be part of the conversation, and that's why we do take an active role. And Simone, who's our head of strategic partnership, he's actually a working group co-chair in the IEEE ILR. So, in PESC, Taki and I are really heavily involved. Taki's on the technical committee. I'm on the steering group for EdExchange. IMS especially is now we've launched badges. We're starting to get more involved. And actually this week we joined IMS, but again, Simone has spoken at many of the conferences, etc. So, having that seat at the table to help to direct respect those standards, we think is, you know, a critical part of what we need to do to, again, help to inform our products and technology.
Very cool, thank you. We've got such a variety of questions actually. Some of them go into the tech a bit deeply, so I'm just going to pluck one of those out and I'll answer that to give you guys a break for a sec. This is from Nathan Dawes. Hi Nathan. In the download to wallet demo, you mentioned the issuer and learner have DIDs. Is the learner DID on the sovereign network, or is it a peer DID just for the connection? So I suspect Nathan knows more about this than he's letting on. So what's happening there, Nathan, is they're using peer DIDs. So when, so the institution, the issuer will have a public DID, and that will be on the sovereign network. But when the connection is made, the learner, their app, which was the Connect Me wallet in this case, creates a new peer DID, and the institution creates a new peer DID for that learner, and they exchange those. So it's peer DIDs which don't go on the ledger, as I'm sure all of you know by now, especially if you read the paper that's entitled What Goes on the Ledger. Peer DIDs don't go on the ledger because they're PII, anyway, in the first case. And they're used just uniquely for that connection. So the DID exchange enables the creation of a secure connection between two parties. And you didn't really mention this, Taki, but that secure connection gives you a persistent, lifelong, if both parties want it to be, link between the learner and the institution, right? Do you want to just cover that in a bit more detail as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got what we essentially create. I think I mentioned it briefly. Was there's a persistent connection between the learner and the institution, or in this case, for the example, we were sort of mimicking the institution, if you like. And what that sort of does is that's that peer-to-peer channel. And the way the communication actually occurs through an agent that is in between that. And if you had, for example, let's say you had another connection on there and you had another DID. So let's say I had a bank on there as well. That would be a separate unique DID, and it would be a separate unique connection. And there's no way that one would know of the other. So you couldn't see the interactions that the others are having. It's almost like having a unique key to each other's home almost. And you could sort of go in there and sort of have that conversation and then disappear again. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, you know, for lifelong learning, you can, the institution will, you know, if they want to, see if somebody wants to do another course, for example, they've got that connection, they can send it down, and the learner knows that it's coming from the university, and the university knows it's the learner. So they can use it for all sorts of things, as well as just, you know, doing the issuance of a credential for a degree, for example.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, let's pick up another one here. Let's have a look at this. How can you get discrete data points such as a grade point average out of a PDF and into a wallet? I know you're looking into standards for learner records. So we covered the standards bit a little bit already, but at the moment, your Digitary is kind of signing PDFs, right? Yeah. So what's the conversion process? How do you get those data points into a credential?
Yeah. Look, that's a really good question. It's sort of on the side of what we're doing with SSI, and it's actually got more to do with our platform and how it sort of operates. So we support all manner of mediums, if you like. So we support, you know, PDF. So an institution can give us a PDF as is that they generate. But what is also more common, or becoming more common, is that universities actually give us data. And what we do is we transform that data into all manner of things, including some of those standards that were mentioned earlier. And we actually generate a lot of those PDFs. So we'll have some templates and we overlay the data. It's a fairly traditional, simple sort of rendering mechanism. Now, as a part of that process, what we do is, or what we're beginning to do in different ways to support some of these things like SSI, right? Because like the question correctly points out, you need the data. So we're starting to store and starting to persist some of those sort of key data points that we need in order to be able to support something like SSI. So if we define a schema on the sovereign ledger that, you know, has half a dozen data points, including GPA and a name and some other bits and pieces, obviously we need access to that data. And no, we don't want to be scraping PDFs at that point in time. So we do it in different ways. Yeah.
And look, I'll just add to that there's a big education piece as well in helping some of the universities that there was always the hard move from paper to PDF, and helping them to continue down that journey. And, one of the bit that we, constantly come up with is educating these institutions on the value of the data and what that data will enable, in the future.
Cool, thanks, James. So more questions coming in, but let me just grab this one. If I send a credential to someone, how does their system evaluate the credential? Does a person need to read it to understand what's in the credential, or can a system evaluate it and react? And that's from Bob Celeste. So it's about the verifier side, isn't it? Do you want to just take that one, Taki, about how does a verifier know that the data they're getting is authentic?
Right. Okay, cool. So you probably saw in that proof request one that we sort of had. So Winston's College I was doing an admission, and Winston's College actually asked for the information. So you probably saw in one of those screens, he actually said, Winston's College is asking for your name, it's asking for your GPA, your major, some other bits and pieces, whatever the data points were. So you're actually getting a list of what information that college or the receiver, if you like, requires, and then your curated profile will deliver that across that channel and across that SSI connection that we've created. Now, what was the other part of that?
So yeah, when they receive, that's the asking, when they receive the proof that you send them, how do they check if it's genuine or not? How do they know where it's come from? Right.
Okay, cool. So so the way the proof request actually works, what you're actually checking against, remember and actually if you were to look up Andy's document of what goes on the ledger, it's actually quite an interesting piece. It actually explains how some of these pieces work. And what you're actually checking, just like you do in the physical world, you're actually validating against the issuer. So with the passport, it says, UK or Australia on the front. They're the ones who've issued it. So they're sort of asserting part of that credential on your behalf. It's very much in the same way. So what's actually happening is it's checking against the issuers did on that, and then it's verifying and validating that the issuer is indeed who they say they are, and it hasn't been tampered with, and so forth and so on.
Yeah, cool. So there's what we call exotic cryptography under the skin, which we don't want anyone to have to worry about that, except for the real crypto guys who need to sort of check how it works. But essentially, every individual attribute in a credential has think of it as like a digital watermark on it. So when I send an attribute from a credential to Taki can look at that watermark and verify where the data came from, that I haven't changed it, it was given only to me, and so on. Yeah. Okay, let's ask another one that's a bit related, actually, and this comes from Pete Scanion. Thank you, Pete. And there's a related question to it as well from Bob Celeste. So in the Winston University example, when the university requested data, it exactly matched the fields in Zoe's West Hobart credential. So you're asking for every single field that she had in that credential in the first place. If Winston's request was for just a couple of those fields, or was for credentials saved in two different digital credentials, can Zoe mix and match her response, providing only the data Winston asked for? And the related question is, follow through with this one. The related question is, you showed date of birth in a credential. How can we protect that info if we're using a credential that includes this information? Okay, so we're talking here about what we call selective disclosure and compound proofs, right?
Yes.
So selective disclosure is the ability to disclose just one attribute from a credential. So in the proof request that was sent, you could just ask for one attribute, okay? And the protocols that are used for exchanging this information and doing the credentials and proofs allows that single attribute to be taken and shown and proven to be authentic in its own right. Compound proofs, where you can ask for data from multiple different credentials and they're mixed and matched exactly as the questioner asked. Yeah. And that's a core part of it. So I think just for clarity, you asked for everything that was in a credential to show it all moving. Yeah. You could have just asked for one attribute, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So obviously for the purposes of the demo, we sort of wanted, this is what we sent and this is what you can retrieve. But yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because with the compound proofs, in particular, plus the selective disclosure, but more so with compound proofs, when we talk about curated profiles, that's exactly what we mean. right? And that's exactly the sort of capability that a lot of this technology supports. It actually supports that curated profile through a compound proof, where again, it goes back to how can a learner present the best selves? Well, maybe they can, potentially cherry pick how they want to show that information and then represent that back to the proof request or if you like.
Yeah.
So yeah, compound proofs is a critical part of what we're looking for out of this tech.
Yeah, and that's a key part of it, isn't it? Because we all have different personas, right?
Exactly
So I might have my going to the library at the university persona, and I might then have a going for a job persona. I need to present different information from the same credentials each time.
That's exactly right.
Okay, very cool. So now let's pick out, there's still loads, so I think we're going to run over. So, let me just pick another one here. Oh, crikey. Not that one, not that one yet. Not yet. Oh no, we've answered that one. Are institutions acting as SSI issuers in your pilot plans, or is it being facilitated through Sovereign? And that's from Philip Long. So are institutions acting as SSI issuers? And I think that means, yeah, well, our universities issuing credentials, right?
Yeah. So what you saw, it was being issued by Digitary. In reality, it's actually a good question. So our plan is that in our pilots, obviously with institutions, that they would be issuing for them. Obviously, just like with any sort of credential and the issuer being such a critical part of that credential, it really needs to be the university. We don't actually intend to be the issuer, as in the issuer that's actually on the sovereign ledger that you're testing against. We want to provide that service to institutions whereby through our platform, they can issue verifiable creds against themselves. And that's sort of what we're heading towards. And in fact, we're looking at some of the new stuff that Evernym is sort of delivering that actually enables that sort of service provider model for us. So we'd like our pilots, or, heading towards pilots as we are now, it will be institutions issuing creds. Just as a bit of a side note, institutions are looking at SSI. A lot of the conversations that we're having with institutions, we're finding that they're reasonably mature in some of the internal sort of kicking around ideas that they've been doing. So we've been pushing open a slightly openish door, and that sort of helped us get there. So we're hoping that these pilots will come along soon, and we'll be doing exactly what that question is asking. Yeah.
Very good, thank you. Let me have another one. I'll answer it. So it came from Joanne Duclis. Hi, Joanne. Can you white label the digital wallet? So the wallet you're seeing there is Evernym's Connect.me wallet, which is available in an app store near you, Android and iOS. And you can download it, and there's a little tutorial you can go through to actually get some credentials. So the answer is yes. So first of all, we have an app SDK, so Digitary could build an app, or you could have a student, your university app for students at the university, and build in credential wallets and exchange capability into that as well. Or your bank could have an app, or anybody. So, so yes, you can white label a digital wallet, absolutely. And I noted actually, maybe James on this one, you showed using credentials to log in as well. So normally people just think of digital credentials and this DID stuff as being used for exchanging information, but you showed login as well. Can you give us a bit more information about that and how that could be used at a university as well?
Yeah, I can take that, James. So logging in is a credential. Providing a username or an email address or whatever plus a password is a credential in and of itself. So that for us, which was that was the lowest hanging fruit that we really wanted to do, because we always thought that was pretty cool. Scanning a QR code to log into a platform, that's awesome. Now for our platform, in that case, that is going back to that previous question, for example, that connection needed to be made with us. So that is a connection that you make with Digitary. Now, at the same time, you could use a subsequent connection with the university that you've perhaps got a cred for, to then authenticate onto their platforms and their systems using exactly the same thing, because you're just exchanging a credential. You're presenting who you are, and you're identifying who you are in a secure and trusted way.
Very good, thank you. Just a quick note as well. We're going to go on for another 15 minutes or so. So if you can stay on, great. If not, the recording will be available. You'll see it on evernym.com/webinars. Next one coming your way, James. This one. Really good question, this one actually. Do you have a strategy for engaging learners not supported through traditional education institutions or contexts? I can see how this is a simple process for those familiar with portable ID management, wondering how it might be adapted or accessed by those with low digital literacy, or those who may need to record non-traditional records of learning. That's from Sharon Liu. So it's really about less digitally aware people and so on.
It's funny, one of the things that we kind of discussed earlier was around the Groningen Declaration Network and, around student mobility. Look, definitely, it's part of kind of, I think, our overall strategy on being learner-centric, and learner-centric should not just be for people who have available, access to technology, etc. So we do want to, look at how we can enable learners, no matter what their capability, etc. You saw the simple UI. I think one of the things that we're going to always try to do is make it as simple and as easy as possible for learners to be able to use.
Yeah, that's very cool. I think there's, at the moment, yes, you need a smartphone, right? You need an iOS or Android device. But it's incredible what the penetration of those sort of devices are. I heard a really interesting stat from one of the NGOs working with refugees coming over into Greece. And they're saying 95% have an Android phone, which just blew me away, So very interesting as well. But I think as your demo showed, making what sounds complex with exotic cryptography and so on, making it really easy with some green ticks that come up, it just simplifies the whole thing, doesn't it?
Sorry, I was just going to say, if you just even look at just the price for an Android phone in market now, you can get a great phone so cheaply, and so a lot of the ones, coming from whether or not China, India, etc., some of those phones have great functionality that are really, really inexpensive.
Yeah, good point, well argued. Okay, so Taki, next one coming for you. It's actually two questions, but they're related. One's from Naveen Chowra and the other is from R. Fiorini. So hi to both of you. Is this supported by blockchain infrastructure, and are documents saved in the blockchain too?
Right, I think this is a good question for both of us, Andy. Okay, so the short answer there is yes, it is supported by blockchain infrastructure, and that's the sovereign ledger on the sovereign network that we've been talking about. Now, the other bit, the second question is actually really interesting. Are documents saved on the blockchain too? Now, what's interesting about that is, first, I'll start with saying no, they're not. But what I want to do is I want to unpack that a little bit. Now, when Digitary went on its blockchain sort of journey of discovery, if you like, if you want to call it that for a second, we did look at a lot of competing, I guess, blockchain sort of initiatives and technologies or solutions rather that were sort of coming out by some really, really interesting work from some, very, very clever teams, very, from MIT, the BlockCerts team, and so forth and so on. So a lot of interesting stuff was going on. One of the things that never really sat with us was the fact that the blockchain was actually used to store creds, albeit the hashes of creds and so forth and so on. So we weren't really, that didn't feel great to us, especially, when taking it to that next level. We wanted to ensure that the learner was safe, and we wanted to ensure that it was done in a secure and a trusted way and so forth and so on. So what we actually like about Sovereign and SSI is that what is actually stored on the ledger, again, I'll point to Andy's great paper on what goes on the ledger. I really highly recommend
which has just been linked to actually in the chat. Brilliant. So I think Alex...
that's fantastic. Yeah, have a read of that. I highly recommend everybody have a read of that. It is a great, it's a great clarifier of how a lot of this stuff works. And what you'll see is what goes on the ledger is only the issuer. Your cred, when it's issued, stays in your digital wallet. It's encrypted, it's safe, it's secure. You've got biometric security on your phone and so forth. So that the cred stays in there. It never goes on the ledger. The only stuff that's on the ledger is the issuer and the schema. And the schema is the definition that defines a sort of data structure for the cred that you want to issue. Did you want to add anything to add to that, Andy?
Yeah, I think spot on. You could have written that paper yourself, Taki. Yeah, putting personal information on a ledger is not good. So when you do that DID exchange, those peer DIDs we talked about, and when you issue the credential, that all happens at the edge, and there's no record of it on the ledger, which is great because that avoids privacy breaches, avoids you being correlated, and has a bunch of other benefits. And talking about those benefits, actually, last week we published an article on the Evernym blog called Defining Safe Credentials. And there's a lot of noise now in the SSI world, and there's what I call SSI washing, where people say, oh, I've got an SSI thing and I've got SSI. How do you know? What are the questions you ask, right? How can you determine if credentials you're using are safe from a privacy and a security perspective? So we put together 5 tests, and Alex is linked to the paper, to the blog post there. I recommend you have a look at it. 5 tests that describe why we've taken the approach we have, and why it helps to protect against like unintended consequences, and avoid the sort of creation of the next surveillance state because of features like the way the credentials are signed, so you can't be correlated around everything you do. Yeah, have a look at that. I think you'll find that very interesting. Next one up here. How long have we got? Another few minutes. We'll do another 2 or 3, shall we? Excellent. Nice to get some feedback there from R. Fiorini. Okay, so what was the next one I was going to ask? Yeah, okay. With more control provided to learners for managing their information, how does Digitary provide a richer user experience that helps the user from being inundated with managing the details that come up from having to understand whether they want to disclose certain parts of information or some other bits and so on? And that's from Matthew Hailstone. So it's really about making what is quite complex quite easy. And I think you showed some of it there, didn't you? Do you want to just give us a bit more info on that, Taki?
That's a great question and an evolving story for us. So look, a lot of what we try to do on the platform is, and you know what, I think all systems, I mean, and I think generally a lot of systems do strive for this sort of thing is, and like I said earlier, don't let the technology get in the way of what you're trying to do. And we very much try to focus on that with what we're doing. And you know, there's infinite complexity to a lot of the stuff that's happening behind the scenes to sort of enable some of the interactions that you saw there, like we sort of pointed to earlier. From, you know, I mentioned earlier, there's what are called agents or agent components that sort of live on the network as sort of intermediaries between some of these channels and so forth. So there's a lot going on. What we try to do is, and I think I did allude to it a little bit in the presentation, is if we go back to sort of, you know, basic principles, basic sort of common and familiar terms and familiar paradigms, and, you know, try and relate back to, in our case, the learner, what they're trying to do in simple terms that they understand. That's always what we're going to strive for. Like I said, we try to avoid language, forget the term blockchain, for example. It's a bit of a tainted term in any case because of some of its recent history. SSI as well, we didn't use SSI anywhere. What we would rather do, for example, is point them to, and we're working on this, a bit of a knowledge base on the platform that will tell them if they want to read it a little bit more about what it is. But when I want to be on the platform and I've got a job to be done and all I want to do is get a cred and be able to use that to, you know, in proof requests and so forth, I want to make that as simple as it is. And if all that takes is dropping a QR code on that document page that you saw, then that's ideally where we'd like to head to. And that's actually what I see the next iteration of the platform is, that it's that simple. You've got your app, you scan your QR code, you suck in your academic credential and you're finished.
Yeah, I think also we shouldn't underestimate people's ability to take on new ways of doing things, right?
Sure,
so
absolutely.
If you just look at WhatsApp, right? With WhatsApp, you know, people have got all these keys on their phone and they don't know anything about it. They just know, oh, I can connect to these people to a group thing. Oh, hang on, I can send a picture of a cat, you know, and suddenly they're doing these things that are quite complex, but the user interface is beautiful. And I know you guys have spent a long time looking at the UI to translate the sort of complex technology under the skin into something really simple.
Yeah.
Here's another one for you. Maybe just chuck this one over at James. Presumably here there's a real upside for universities or higher education institutions, because if students are going around with an app that you're starting to help them get credentials for, that can also take like a student ID credential and a library credential and a sports center credential and so on, right? Are you looking at that kind of side of it as well? And same platform, same protocols and stuff.
Yeah, look, it's a logical next step, and a big part of our business, the other side of our business, is helping international students, come into, say, Australia, who want to apply for, a postgraduate degree. Part of that, they're required to bring their digital credentials with them, but also part of that, they're also required to prove their identity. And, all of these suddenly flow-on things become a logical step. And so it makes sense for us to, potentially look at, some of those components as well as part of this process. And so, look, it's definitely in our thinking when we start to look at what that end goal of our solution looks like.
Sure. And I think it'd be safe to say that if there's a whole group of students who have trustworthy digital credentials from their university, and they could use those maybe to get a bank account, for example, or to the example of getting a job or whatever, there's a much broader ecosystem, student discounts at shops, all that kind of thing as well. So it's much bigger than
we're already working with some employment marketplaces, some other providers who are doing these sort of things, and helping people get a job is obviously is closing that loop with employability. And so that those discussions are already happening.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, so let's just do one more then, just before we finish. Let's have a look. See. Actually, we've covered that one already. Let's find one. Okay, this is quite an interesting one from Mark Packham. Does the team think there's a role for SSI in the apostille space for academic credentials, or is that too legal a space to play in?
The which space?
Apostille, so it's apostille.
Notarizing.
Yeah,
notarizing.
Yeah, notarizing. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, is the short answer. That came up a few months ago, actually, on a similar thread internally. Look, the short answer is yes. Is it a replacement? I don't know. I think, again, sort of in line with a little bit of what James said earlier, we don't limit ourselves to any particular approach with this stuff. When you're looking at some of the apostille services that we're looking at in the US in particular, and where they tend to be leveraged a little bit more, we see this as I was almost going to use the term drop-in replacement. Not quite, because it's not quite it. It's definitely a viable complement, if you like. It's maybe it can help along some of those sorts of processes. It can help along some of those mechanisms. Not unlike sort of what we did. Do we want? We've got our platform lives to serve learners in all manner of ways. And you could even argue that SSI in its purest form starts to sort of supersede some of the things that we traditionally do as well. But I do feel that there is a complementary element between us all, and there's a bit of a symbiotic relationship that could be achieved with all of these different services and all of these different mechanisms, and just sort of growing together to sort of evolve this new world that we're heading towards.
Very cool. So I think there's a whole bunch of other questions on interoperability and some more technical detail stuff, but I think we'll run out of time. And I know for you guys in Melbourne, it is pretty late. So I'd like to say thank you, Takis and James, for coming on. Really good stuff. We really enjoy these kind of webinars because we see people like you putting this tech into practice, and it's what we've kind of dreamed of happening is people taking it and just building on top of it. So really good demo, really good explanation of what you do, and thanks very much for answering all those questions as well. Thanks to the people who joined in and did ask the questions and took part. We'll have a recording of this available on our website shortly. Any outstanding questions, we'll try and get answers to them and get those posted up as well. So with that, thank you very much indeed for coming on. Taki, James, thank you. We look forward to seeing you on our next webinar, which is all about organizational identity and commerce, amazingly using the same protocols and proofs and credentials. So that's it. Thanks very much from Evernym, and we'll see you later. Bye.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Cheers.